free floating exchange rates. When a pound is strong, £1 will buy $2 as opposed to $1.5. When a pound is strong, this will mean that the US dollar is, in comparison with a bilateral exchange rate, weak. So £1, or rather $1, will now equal 50p. When the dollar is stronger, it would be the case that around 67 pence would be the cost of purchasing $1. Another way to look at it, $1 is now buying 67 pence as opposed to 50p. So, if the pound is strong against the dollar, it makes it cheaper for UK consumers to purchase American goods. A UK citizen may purchase a pair of trainers, Nike trainers, an American good. To pay for the Nike trainers, the UK citizen will supply pounds to the Forex market, that's the foreign exchange market, and in return will demand US dollars to pay for the goods. Therefore, the demand for the US dollar will shift to the right. So the consequence is that the pound will fall in value, the pound will fall in value from $2 to $1.5, whilst the dollar will increase in value from 50 pence to the dollar to now 67 pence to the dollar. Purchasing the Nike trainers has meant the UK citizen has bought an import. This will be a withdrawal from the UK circular flow of income. All things being held equal, this may lead to a negative multiplier effect, as shown on my diagram. In contrast, as the UK is importing the goods from the US, these goods mean for the US an export, and therefore the US is having a positive multiplier because, change the colour, we can see that the GDP is increasing while the UK's is falling. This process will continue until the demand for the US dollar, or rather the demand for the Nike trainers, shifts to here. At this point, prices will become high. That is, there's inflation in the US. This will mean that American consumers now switch to importing British goods. This is because British goods will have a lower price level. So if you see at AD4, the price level is very low, whilst up here, it's extremely high. So the implication will be that the UK will then receive a positive multiplier effect, a reversal, and the US will receive a negative multiplier as it's importing the goods from the United Kingdom this time. It should also be noted that as so many Nike pairs of trainers were bought, the US dollar actually increased in value. $1 was now buying 67 pence as opposed to 50p. This is another reason why the Americans will be importing UK goods. The final thing to note is that with a free floating exchange rate, there can be no overall balance of payment disequilibrium. In other words, the balance of payments will self-correct. So the UK, as it was importing American goods, might have experienced a current account deficit, whilst the US was experiencing a current account surplus from selling all those trainers to the UK. However, as we've said, the high value dollar plus high price level in the United States, that inflation means that Americans will start to buy UK goods. So the surplus America experienced will reduce and in theory head towards a deficit, while the UK, who is experiencing current account deficit, will now experience a current account surplus as they start exporting more goods to the United States. There are numerous examples of free floating exchange rates, including the US dollar. I've noted three others. Pound sterling, which is obviously our currency, the Australian dollar and the New Zealand dollar. We are now going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of a free floating exchange rate. Automatic correction of the current account and the balance payments is the first advantage of free floating exchange rates. That is, the government simply lets the exchange rate move freely to the equilibrium. In this way, balance of payments disequilibria are automatically and instantly corrected. That self-correcting current account to which we've just referred. Second, there's no problem of having to keep foreign currency reserves. Since there is no central bank intervention in the foreign exchange market, there is no need to hold reserves, which is necessary with a managed or fixed exchange rate. Third, there's the insulation from external economic events. A country to some extent is protected against world economic fluctuations and shocks when it has a free floating rate. For example, let's assume that the rest of the world goes into recession. The demand for UK exports will fall. This will lead to a depreciation of the pound exchange rate. This in turn will boost the demand for UK exports and domestic substitutes for imports. Remember, a weak pound will make imports to the UK expensive. This boosted demand again will help to offset the dampening effects of the world recession. 4. And final point, governments are free to choose their domestic policy. Under a fixed exchange rate, a government loses control of its interest rate setting policy. That is, if the currency needs to appreciate, then the interest rate will need to encourage hot money inflows and shift the demand curve for pound sterling to the right. However, if there is a large negative output gap, this will make UK exports less competitive and thus AD will shift to the left. In other words, the recession is going to worsen. However, with a free floating exchange rate, the policymaker, the Bank of England in a UK context, has free rein to decide on any interest rate that allows low and stable inflation as well as economic growth. Disadvantages of a free floating exchange rate. The first is uncertainty for traders and investors. The uncertainty caused by currency fluctuations can discourage international trade and investment. To some extent, the problem can be overcome by using the forward exchange market. Here, traders agree with a bank today the rate of exchange for some point in the future, let's say 6 months' time. This allows traders to plan future purchases of imports or sales of exports at a known rate of exchange. Of course, banks charge for the service since they are taking upon themselves the risk of adverse exchange rate fluctuations. This will not help long-term investment, however. That is, where decisions are made based on anticipated costs and revenue flows for many years to come. In short, a volatile exchange rate means the cost revenue flows cannot be anticipated. 2. Lack of discipline on the domestic economy. Governments may pursue irresponsible inflationary policies. Also, unions and firms may well drive up wages and prices without the same fear of losing overseas markets or of the government imposing deflationary policies. That is, there is no strong incentive to cut production costs, and inevitably inflation rises with the obvious consequences. Thus, to improve international competitiveness, you can devalue your currency. It's like a magic wand, rather than the need to produce efficiently. That is, this means the currency will eventually depreciate to offset any inflation that occurs. Eventually, the depreciation resulting from this inflation will itself fuel the inflation by raising the price of imports. Fall in the value of a currency, however, might not improve a current account deficit. A fall in the value of a currency will only reduce a current account deficit if the Marshall-Lerner condition holds. The Marshall-Lerner condition says that for a fall in the value of a currency to lead to an improvement in the balance of payments, the price elasticity of demand for imports plus the price elasticity of demand for exports must be greater than 1. That is, they must be price elastic. So you can see in the example here that only country B will see an improvement in its trade balance if there was a depreciation in their currency. This is because the value of their exports and imports add up to more than 1. This leads us nicely to the J-curve. The J-curve shows the effect of inelastic demand for imports and exports in the short run. The Marshall-Lerner condition might hold in the long run, so there'll be an improvement in a current account deficit if the value of a currency falls. However, in the short run, a current account deficit is likely to worsen as demand for imports and exports, which will be inelastic, because it takes time for people to switch to cheaper substitutes. In the short run, the overall value of exports fall and the overall value of imports rise. That's because the quantity of them is not changing. It's just the expenditure on imports is increasing because we're now having to use up more pounds to buy the same quantity of imports because our currency has depreciated. The effect is that the current account position or the trade account position will worsen as described in purple on the diagram in front of you. Over the longer term, it will become, that's it, meaning our exports and imports, the value of these will be total more than 1. Therefore, they will become elastic. Therefore, the depreciation will improve our trade account position over time. This is a significant piece of evaluation, and I suggest you note this diagram down.